everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Bright Side of Life. I am your host, Melissa Bright, and today we have a gentleman on here that is going to be sharing his grief story. I'm going to let him share that full story, but he actually just not even 6 months ago, he left his career as a full-time music entertainer, and is now helping people work through their own grief. So the topic we're going to be talking about today is, as we know, we're very familiar with this. We're going to be talking about grief. But before I go any further, why don't I introduce Tom? Tom, welcome to the Bright Side of Life. How are you feeling today?
Pretty good. Good to be with you, Melissa. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always usually ask people when we're talking about our grief stories, things, I don't want to give too much detail because it's your story to tell. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what your life was like prior to February 23rd, 2023?
It was great, and so great that at times I almost had that feeling that this is going too good. And so I was a full-time music entertainer. I have been for the last 14 years. During weekdays, I played at nursing homes and care centers and things, and hour-long shows, and sometimes did multiple shows in a day. I was a award-winning solo act here locally in the clubs and bars. Um, and I also played in some bands, kind of mixed it up with everything.
Mhm.
And everything's just cruising along. And 2.5 years ago, my son came to live with us for at that time, I had been estranged from him for the 5 years before that. So it was just great to have him here. He was
Mhm.
25 at the time. And so it was a great time of reuniting. And so everything was going very, very well. And every day I just was happy to get up, privileged to be able to do what I was doing, and enjoyed life. I did a lot of shows. I did over 400 a year usually.
Oh,
And so very busy every single day somewhere. And then I'd play on the weekends and things like that. So things were going great, and then just feeling very good about life and very privileged and pleased with what I had.
yeah. I when you say you left your full-time music career, what kind do you sing? Do you play instruments? Do you do all the above?
Yes, I'm primarily a vocalist. So,
Okay.
but the solo show that I did, I played with background music. And so I played acoustic guitar or just performed to the tracks, in the care centers and things like that. In the bars, I played with acoustic, almost, just about every song. So,
Yeah.
just played along with him. So it was a full sound and everything. And then the groups I was in, I was primarily the lead vocalist and played
Okay.
guitar, rhythm guitar with them too. So
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think it's really cool that you did that for nursing homes because I don't want to say I grew up in nursing homes, but my mom was a nurse and I was always going either with her to work or we had some aunts that were in nursing homes, and I knew that they would look like forward to those kind of events and stuff like that.
yeah, that was something that I truly enjoyed doing. A couple of years ago, it was kind of funny because I doing full-time music, a lot of people would ask me all the time, do you ever get tired of that? I mean, you're sort of, to be able to do something like that. And so, one day, I'd play sometimes 10 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes I'd play at 2, sometimes both.
Mhm.
One day I was here and it was a little bit later show, maybe 7 or something. And I'm at home like anybody else. And I'm like, oh, I don't feel like going, and so I get to that show and somebody came up to me, a woman, just a dear woman came up to me and just told me how much it meant to her and everything. And I just said, what a fool for thinking what I think, because, I could actually be in this place. I have friends, younger than
Yeah.
me even who had things happen to them. And, to give them a break for an hour in that life there and looking in their eyes and knowing what they must be going through. I mean, I just felt like a fool, and I said, from that time on, I was like, I am totally privileged to be able to do this and I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I never thought that way again. So it was a good revelation, actually.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes those reminders are important for us to be like, oh yes, like this is why. Exactly that. Somebody just said you're making a difference in their life, and that means everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So why don't we because I was curious about you and your son's relationship, and you said a little bit that you were estranged from him for 5 years. So why don't you talk about a little bit about that relationship if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, I got divorced when I was in 2008.
Okay.
So the kids were in their teens then, and there was a few years of, still I was in the same area where their mother was. And so I was able to, spend a lot of time with them as they got in their teens, like most do. They kind of drifted away. And
Mhm.
then my ex-wife moved out about 50 miles from where we live here now.
Okay.
And so that was her hometown. And he went out there with her at that time, and her and I are very close still. So she would send me texts at times saying, "I don't know where Jeff is. He was in drugs, doing drugs."
Mhm.
And she's like, "I'm afraid I'm going to get a call that he's gone,"
Mhm.
and all of this. So it was that bad. And so
Okay.
of course I feared for it. And just vaulting ahead, when he came to us finally, um, he said that it was nothing of my doing why he didn't contact me. It was all him, and
Mhm.
probably just not being the person that,
Yeah.
he knows I wish he would be, and that kind of thing, maybe just staying away. And
Mhm.
he always told me that afterwards, was that, "Dad, it was nothing you did. It was me."
Yeah.
And so I didn't hear from him, like I said, for about those 5 years beforehand. And his mother and her sisters and things and her family out there were always encouraging her, because I left my door open and I said, "He can always come here." And
Mhm.
so he finally decided to come here. And when he sat down with Judy, my fiance, and I, we didn't know what he could say to us to make us comfortable, because it's a tough situation, because we didn't want, it's difficult dealing with an addict, as anyone
Yeah.
would know. But he did say the right things. He sat down with us, he humbled himself, and we were very comfortable in opening our house to him. And so we said, "Jeff, come here and get your feet on the ground." Excuse me. I said to him, I said, "Don't worry about the past. Let's just move on from here." And
Mhm.
so we did, and he did very, very well. I mean, there was no indications of him doing anything. He was a homebody for the most part. He got a very good construction job with a very high-end company here, and was doing very, very well. He loved the work. And he basically come home and we'd hang out and talk for a while and maybe go out in the garage. We have a made up garage with, flat screens, TVs, and a couch, and we have a dartboard out there. So we'd play darts or watch sports, whatever it was, and so things were going very, very well. And then about a month before Jeff passed, he had a seizure, and he had had some of these in the past. Now we're not sure exactly if they were from a benign tumor that was removed from his head like
Mm.
10, 12 years before,
Okay.
or if they were induced by drugs all the time. We have no idea, because it may have been from the drugs, actually.
Okay.
So when this happened, he told us, and he leveled with me, and he said, "Dad, I screwed up last night." And I
Mhm.
said, "What happened?" And he goes, "I took something, and that's why I had the seizure." So
Mm.
that was our very first indication that anything was going on. And I said, "We didn't think that you may not fall, in this. Of course we're disappointed, but let's pick it up from here." And I said, "Jeff, you're playing Russian roulette with things these days." And he knew it.
Mm.
But those drugs are very different nowadays. They really do alter their minds, and I
Yeah.
don't believe that they have a control. I really don't. I think it's a sickness like anything else with these nowadays. So that doesn't define him, and
Right.
that's a big part of my healing with it too.
Yeah. May I ask you what he was addicted to?
There was a lot of things. He
Okay.
said, "Dad," because I'd ask him that, and he'd say, "Dad, think the worst and then worse than that."
Oh, wow.
And so I
Okay.
think he was exploring with a lot of different things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Now, can you talk a little bit about, what happened on February 23rd?
Yeah. Every day I'd get up with him in the morning. I work from home a lot if I'm not doing my shows and things. I'm doing promotions, and so I disciplined myself by getting up every morning just like a regular job. So
Mhm.
I would get up, and he would be getting up around the same time. We'd have coffee together, and then he'd go off to work and I'd go off to the gym before I got started with my day.
Mhm.
So that day, it was we had an ice storm in this area. I live in Niagara Falls, New York, and we had ice storm that day. So when I got up a little bit later than normal, and he wasn't up yet. And I just texted him and I said, no work with a question mark, because I thought maybe they called off because of
Mm.
the way the weather was.
Yeah.
So I had my coffee and I didn't hear any reply. And then I got myself ready to go to the gym, and I just felt like I needed to go up and check.
Mhm.
And that's when I found him. And it's the most horrific scene that a parent can have and to imagine. And I heard someone say one time that when they witnessed a father, with his dead son or daughter, I can't remember what it was, but there was the father's wail. And
Mm.
I certainly had that. And I used to be an EMT with ambulance for 15 years, and I rolled him over and I started doing CPR right away, but I knew he was gone. And he probably passed earlier that evening. What happened was he came home the night before, and it was a little bit later than normal.
Mhm.
And so we suspect that's when he went to go get whatever he got. But that was a Wednesday night. And so he got home a little bit late. Sometimes he did from work, so it wasn't that unordinary.
Mhm.
And we sat and had Chinese dinner together, him, Judy, and I. And he was normal and everything. And then he was on the couch in the living room where he normally watch TV and his videos and things, and on his phone. And so we went up early to go watch a movie, Judy and I, at about 8 o'clock. And now that we think back, they were on the third floor. They're a floor above us, Judy's son and Jeff.
Mhm.
And so we hear things up there all the time and don't think anything about it. And so when we think back, when we were up there after we heard Jeff go up, we did hear like a thud,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
that may have been the time, and
Mm.
you struggle with that. But I also
Right.
know that if he had those problems, he was going to have them whether we saved him that time too.
Yeah.
So it's so just crazy to think on a Wednesday night, he just decided to do that. And it doesn't make any sense at all. There's no sense to it. And like
Yeah.
I said, him doing those drugs, he didn't want this to happen. It was
Mm-mm.
not no way in
No.
no way intentional.
Mm-mm.
And so there's no way he would have wanted me to come up there and find him that way. So
Right.
we were very, very close these last 2.5 years. So there's no way that would have ever crossed his mind.
Right.
So and it was just horrific, of course, and you deal with that and now all the time. And so if I can about that scene, can I go on about that a little
Of
bit?
course. Of course.
I've and I'm going to mention what I've done to help me in this grief a little bit.
Okay. Yep.
Very early on, I started, I'm a resource person. I'm always looking for resources. And I knew right away, I was like, I need help.
Mhm.
And I knew it. Now, in the
Right.
past, I was in ministry for 15 years. I was at the Wesleyan Church. I was a pastor there for 15 years. I was in volunteer ministry before that. So a total of 20 some years, probably. We did a radio show locally here and that type of thing. I was with the Buffalo Christian Center, traveled over to England with a singing group, did all these things. And then I worked ambulance for 15 years and took critical incident stress debriefing training. And I was a supervisor there and took Red Cross disaster training. And then after I was pastoring, I got divorced. And then I moved on to hospice, and I worked at Niagara Hospice for 3.5 years as a spiritual care director. So a lot of background in these kind of things.
Yes.
But I knew, even though I've been in music all this time, I mean, it just, there's no words to describe how brutal it is. I mean, um, I knew I was changed. I mean,
Mhm.
there's no way you don't change through something like that. And I didn't know. You have no clue in the beginning where you're going to go or what you're going to do.
Right.
Your whole life has changed, and no matter what kind of solid ground you were on, everything has changed.
Right.
And so eventually, about 3 weeks in, I don't know where I got the link to grief.com, it's called, and it's run by David Kessler. He's one of the foremost grief experts in all the world. He
Mhm.
was a grief expert long before he then lost his son in 2016 to fentanyl poisoning as well, 21-year-old son,
Oh,
which is
wow.
amazing because he was a grief expert for 30 years before that happened. And so I found him in his online group, and it was like $34 a month. And I'm thinking, if I go to a counselor, it's going to cost me
Right.
$100 a shot or more. So I joined that. I was like, okay, right away. And it's a peer-to-peer group. You meet, there's on Mondays, they have breakout rooms where you go into, maybe, there's one for suicide. There's one for different age, children losses, and all these different things, all these different groups. So you can go in a specific group and just share with each other. It's not counseling or anything like that. It's just
Yep.
sharing and being in a community with people that care about what you're going through. So nothing's weird to them, and there's no, you can come on just crying like a baby, and
Right.
everybody's there to hug you. So joined that group, and I started to get some help right away. And then so I learned something in that one time. He was talking about this horrific scene that
Mhm.
your mind will start playing games with you with. I was at Judy's son's volleyball game, and that view of that scene came into my mind. I mean, I'm like, what is going on?
Right.
It's just so critical. It's almost like PTSD, really.
Yep.
And some people probably go there with that. I don't have
Right.
that specifically, but so what he said was, when that comes into your mind, to change, you got to change your mindset, because you can sit there and dwell on that, and all of a sudden you're going in a very bad
Yeah.
place.
Right.
So what he said is, just acknowledge it, feel the grief, but then say, I love you and I miss you, Jeff. And you're turning that
Mhm.
into love instead of grief. And that's the whole process of your grief walk, is to have more love than grief.
Mm.
So, I mean, it's been very powerful, and I do it. I still do it because it still happens, and it's going to happen probably the rest of my life. So, that's one powerful part of that.
That is very powerful. I've never heard it, that exercise or however you want to say what that is, I've never heard that before, and that could be super helpful because I have my own, memories of my mom was on hospice when I lost her and I was there, and memories like that will come back, and um that probably would have been helpful for me, when that stuff like that comes back. So
Mhm.
turning the grief into love.
Yes, yes, and I watched another. She's a grief coach. Actually, her name is Julie Clough, and I just watched a webinar or a seminar that she did, or whatever. It was an hour-long thing, and she came up with another great one that I love. And she said, a lot of people say grief is love. She
Mhm.
goes, I don't agree with that. Grief is the pain you feel because of the love that you had.
Yeah.
Because she said, sometimes, what if people equate grief with love, then they're afraid to let go and let the grief change, because they feel that they're losing the love portion if they're
Oh,
equated. So that's very
yeah.
powerful too. And I'm right behind that one. I think that's
Yep.
great,
Yep.
because you can let the grief lessen, and you will always love the person. So that's never going to die.
Mm,
And so they're not equated. They're separate. The depth of your grief is the depth of your love, but the grief
yeah.
can change.
Mm.
And that's powerful too.
That is a very, very good point because I know a lot of people do struggle with that. If you um think of them less, say it's 5 years down the road, but then you'll start to have guilt and be like, am I forgetting them? Am I forgetting them? I'm not as sad as I was when it first happened, just going through those kind of stages. Um Now, something I want to go back to just because I do think it's important. At what point did you find out that this was fentanyl that did this?
The day it happened, I didn't even realize it at the time. I guess I stepped on a piece of tinfoil that was there. And
Okay.
see, when he well, I don't know if he had a seizure or
Mhm.
just cardiac arrest, but he bent over and he hit the bedside table. So his
Okay.
head was cut a little bit, and so there was blood that had dripped on this tinfoil that was on the floor. And apparently I stepped on it with my slipper when I was up there with him, and they found it on the stairs and I had no idea it was there. So
Mhm.
but my footprint was on it. So we knew something was going on. It did take a while for the testing, a couple
Okay.
months or something before the coroner did call me and let me know that it was definitely fentanyl.
Okay. I don't all I know is that it is like obviously deadly, but I just don't know that much about it. Something that I was not even aware of is like that's what they give patients in the hospital, but like it's at some kind of dose like for painkiller.
Yeah.
Um but I didn't even know that stuff. But it just seems
Yeah.
that obviously what he did was laced with that.
Right. They don't take just the fentanyl. It's
Right.
laced in something. Yeah.
Ugh,
And the dealers don't even know what they're throwing out there now. And it's
right.
crazy because you would think from a business standpoint, surely you don't want to be killing off your clients,
Right.
but the dealers have no clue. They don't know what's in there, and why they're cutting it with this stuff. I have no idea because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No.
But now it's in almost everything. They can find it in marijuana. They can find it in all different things. So it's very scary and a scary scene for them to be in. Besides the drugs changing their
Right.
mindset, anyways,
Yep.
and it actually does cause an actual change in the mind now that they're physiologically seeing the drugs they're taking nowadays. It
Mm,
changes them, and they're not right. It's a
right.
sickness.
Yeah.
It's like anything else. You would not condemn, people who have cancer and blame them for having cancer. And yes,
No.
they didn't have to make a decision initially to take the drugs, but it's so terrible now that, even experimenting. I experimented when I was younger,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I've heard a story of a sweet young girl, 20 years old or something, took one pill one time, and it was laced with fentanyl, and she's dead.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's crazy, a crazy world out there with us.
Yeah, it is scary. I have a 21-year-old daughter and I have had many, many talks with her because I'm like it's not like worth it. It's not worth taking that chance because obviously it can happen and it does happen, you know.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter, what kind of kid they are,
Uh-uh.
because Jeff was a very, very smart person. He was so smart for school that he was bored in it,
Yeah.
and so that's the way he was in school, and he could just get through with everything. And that's probably why he started drugs and things back then because it was boring to him. And
Right.
when we would talk, I mean, I have my beliefs about our consciousness going on after we pass and all these things. And so I talked to him about those things, neat things I'd watch or whatever. And he'd say, Dad, he talked to me about quantum physics and things. And I'm looking up things on my phone as I'm talking to him because of his intellect. And it was so encouraging to talk to him and the things he would watch. And I loved his perspective on things. It was always challenging to me. And I loved that, and
Mm,
he loved sharing things with me too. So, I mean, it was so nice to just sit there and talk and be that way with him,
yeah.
and, just I'd laugh all the time about, you're a little too much like your dad now, like that, and laugh, or I'd give him a dad joke and he'd just shake his head and,
Right.
whatever. But yeah, it does, all the misconceptions, all the, things that people want to say, this is what a drug addict is, or what is it. It's just not true anymore. And it
Mm-mm.
doesn't matter who it is.
Nope.
It's horrific. Yeah.
No. It's I don't know if I've heard where I heard this before, but like drugs don't discriminate. It doesn't care your race, your age, your income. There's doctors that are addicts. I mean, my mom was a nurse. She was an addict because, well, she had very, very easy access to stuff. So much that she got
Mhm.
caught for stealing painkillers because that's
Hmm.
what she did to because of her traumatic childhood. And she got caught. And her only option, they told her, was you either get help, seek help, or you lose your nursing license. And
Sure. Yeah.
thankfully for her, she chose to get help and she was sober for the rest of her life and clean and
Uh,
and all that. But that's obviously not always the story. Um, I want to ask you, just because I am curious about this. You said you have your own beliefs about consciousness when people pass away. Do you mind if I ask you like what those are? Because
no,
I'm curious.
I love to share it when people ask, because you don't always just bring this up to people, but a couple of years ago, my mom passed away. She was 95, And so my brother, we were sitting in her, she died at home. She was in the living room in a hospice bed.
Mhm.
So I knew she was getting near end stage. And so I called everybody that day and said, you probably should get over here today. I have a big family. So my oldest brother and I were talking in the kitchen that morning before she passed. He said, I've started exploring like near death experiences are amazing. And
Mhm.
so long story short, my resource mind, I go right to the top. So
Yeah.
I want to see what the scientists are saying. I want to know what the doctors are saying. And so I went right to the top, started exploring this way back then. And
Mhm.
so my beliefs just really, I think there's irrefutable evidence now that something happens like that. So, and there's some basic tenets of all of them that are the same. And so I just believe that our consciousness, that we are all part of one consciousness. And even when I
Mhm.
was back in the Christian faith, it fits with the biblical narrative of going to heaven and with God and everything and all becoming one and everything. So it fits. And I think it fits a lot of the religions that way. And we go on, and that is God, our love, the immense amount of love they feel there and everything. And it brings you back to what your purpose is in this life. And that is that I believe Jeff's present here. I really do. And
Right.
I talk to him all the time, and I meditate now, and I'm trying to kind of get my vibration level up. You can actually
Mhm.
come into contact with them. I haven't had that somebody called it a burning bush experience, and I think that's a right thing. I've had a couple of close people tell me that they've had visions of Jeff in the afterlife, and telling me some very encouraging things with that. So that's been great.
Yeah.
Personally, no, I haven't had any dreams. I haven't been. They're coming, but I
Mhm.
haven't yet. I think you have to get past a certain grief space
Mm.
before you really experience those things. So
Yeah.
those will come. I've heard him saying, "Dad, Dad," this kind of thing. It's funny. Every time I walked in the bathroom initially, I'm hearing "Dad, Dad." I'm like, Jeff, I'm here. I'm right here. And I love you, buddy.
Wow.
And so it was like, yeah, that's my belief on that. I think, and our purpose, it gets back to our purpose and kind of where I'm going with all this stuff
Yep. Yep.
is that our purpose is to love one another here. It's as
Yep.
simple as that. And the golden rule, which is part of every major religion that's out there, is to love the person the way that you would love yourself.
Yep.
And so those are the two things that as are driving me now, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
And
bet
I've
it
felt I'm sorry,
No, you're
I
okay.
felt a profound change in me
Y
too.
Yeah.
And I feel like, as brutal as it sounds, my belief is so strong in this stuff that I believe that I may have needed to be realigned in what I was doing. I was
Mm.
doing great service to people, and I know I was, and I enjoyed it and was privileged to be able to do the music that I was doing.
Mhm.
And I may return to that someday. I have no idea. But right
Yeah.
now it's not there at all. And I feel like I was going off track too far in one way or something, and I needed to be realigned. And
Mhm.
in the sense of the whole thing that I believe in, that can make a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. And, just with that, there's so much comfort in knowing that and believing that like Jeff is right there, Jeff is here, Jeff because I take comfort in that also. I used to, I think, believe not saying I don't believe in a heaven, but I believe way more that my mom is here and I could call upon her at any time that I needed
Hmm.
and just say, "Mom, help me get through this," or just be here to guide me, whatever it is. And it helps me a lot because I, don't have either of my parents here anymore. And sometimes, obviously, I miss that. And so I'm like, okay, well, if I can't see them and I can't ask them, I can still ask them to be here and be in my presence and guide me. And I think I've decided that, yes, they're here anytime I want to call upon them to feel
Yes,
that.
and you miss them dearly in a physical sense. There's
Hmm.
no way around that, and it's always going to be that way. I mean, I sometimes I'll just go look at his picture and I'm like, God, I miss you, buddy. And
Yeah.
miss those talks and everything, but I can still have them. And I
Yep.
think eventually, if anyone is going to make contact with me, Jeff's going to do it because that's the kind of kid he was. He's sitting there saying, I gotta, he's probably frustrated that he can't just
Right.
appear before me or whatever. And he knows what I believe in. We talked in depth about this stuff. In fact,
Right.
he said that he took DMT, which is a
Yep.
drug that takes you to that state. He goes,
Mhm.
Dad, that's exactly what you achieve in this. And I was like,
Yeah.
really? I'd never heard about it before because I was telling about the consciousness going on and all of
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was so that's that,
Mm.
that just shows again the kind of kid he really was, and
Yeah.
his deep thought about all this stuff and everything. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, I want to ask you, so if my listeners, haven't noticed, his son passed away February of this year. I mean, he's not even totally 6 months out of this. And I have said on every one of my episodes that I have people that have lost people, just the courage, and we're going to get into more of like all the stuff that you're doing now. But for you even to be on here talking about your story 6 months later, I think is incredible, and I think it will for sure help somebody that's maybe going through a similar situation, um, or, a parent, whatever it is. So I wanna thank you for that. I also wanted to mention about the 6 months because there are stages of grief, and they, I don't believe, are usually in any kind of order of like, "Oh, well, what are we gonna have Monday today, and what
Yeah.
stage are we gonna be in?" So, can I ask you, what stages have you felt like you've been in? What one, like, have you been in one longer than the other? Um, just your ideas about the stages of grief.
Yeah. Denial initially, of course, the trauma impact very quickly. I mean, the first day or two or whatever,
Yeah.
probably. Um, I there was at one point where I was like, you know what? All my deaths that I've experienced, my dad died when I was 10. I'm the youngest of 7 kids.
Mm,
Then I lost a best friend in high school to a car accident. Two of my niece or brother-in-law and a sister-in-law both had passed during the course of this, and then I lost a very dear friend when I was 27. Um, and she either committed suicide or was murdered. And
mm,
so, all these crazy things, and then my mom passing and everything. And I never thought I experienced anger. And I even said this, as I was kind of exploring going through things about Jeff and everything. And then I realized, you know what? I am angry. I'm angry about the drug situation. I'm not
mm.
angry at him.
Right.
Sometimes Judy says that. She goes, I'm so mad at him for, and I can understand that. But I'm more mad that, you know, something like that took him from me, and that's really where that anger comes from.
Mhm.
Um, the others, they come and go. I think I go up and down, and I'm taking something very mild, to keep me even keeled and this kind of thing. I had a very wise doctor who kept me on it. He said, about 3 months into it, I said, I feel like I'm doing pretty good. And I really did. And
Yeah.
I'd even go out to Jeff's picture and look at it. And we got a thing up on our wall. He was a huge Buffalo Bills fan. I took him to his first game a couple of years ago, and so we
Yeah.
watched every game together. And so we have Judy put his jersey up in a glass case on our wall in the garage where we watched all the games. And we have kind of a Bills section up there. And then we have some pictures of him at the games with us, and a beautiful picture of him from one of his birthdays. And so sometimes I just go out there and I just look at it to bring me into kind of the depth of grief that I need to, I want to
Mm.
still experience it. I don't want to get too busy with all these things we're going to talk about here that I'm doing
Yeah.
and not process my grief, because if you put it off, it's going to continue to come at the strength level that it's at, and you're never going to, start moving to that different part of grief, or that different more love than grief, as we talked about before. You want that grief
Yeah.
to change as you go, but you have to process it and look at all those things. And there's a great course that I run through with David Kessler's thing on there, to go through that. And he has great, questions to ask and help you work through that. So
Yeah.
that's really, I think they come and go. And
Yep.
the meaning part came really quick for me, in this initial part of it.
Mhm.
So I'm grateful for that. And that's the last one now that kind of was added. Kessler worked with Kubler Ross. And so the family of Kubler Ross, after she passed, said that he could add that sixth stage of grief, which is
Oh,
finding meaning. And so
wow.
they gave him that blessing on that. And so he's written a book on that too. And it's just very, I'm not here to be an advocate for him, but he's
Yeah,
helped me immensely,
of
and
course.
so that book is tremendous. I listened to it on audiobook, and it really kicks you in the butt and says, look at, this isn't going to go away,
Right.
yeah. And so what are you going to do? And,
Yeah.
you have a choice.
Mm, yeah.
So
Did you know some of this beforehand, or was it really when after Jeff passed and, you started looking into the David Kessler stuff that you're like, okay, this one, I really need help and guidance. And what do I do next? Where do I go from here? Or did you already kind of know in terms of the processing emotions? Because that's the hardest for people. Some people, well, a lot of people just want to run. And I understand, like, it's very,
yeah,
very hard to face. So did you know that beforehand?
I knew it, of course, through my hospice work and everything. I knew the stages and everything,
Yeah.
and to work along people with that. I was a little bit scared in the beginning when I was feeling so good, because I was like, I knew the depth of something like this is nothing like I've experienced in my life. Now,
Right.
I've been someone who's been good in difficult situations. It's the reason I joined the volunteer fire company and then worked ambulance. I
Right.
came upon two accidents. I was the first person on
Mm.
scene, almost 2 consecutive weeks it happened to me. And the first one was a pregnant lady who got T-boned right on her side. Now, I didn't know anything medically to do or anything else, but I just comforted the people. The other gentleman was an 83-year-old guy. And so I just sat with them and comforted them until help got there. And then
Mhm.
I went on my merry way. Well, the second time it happened, I was like, I just realized I'm good in this type of situation. I don't get flustered by it or whatever. So I immediately went to the fire hall in my town and joined that day. And so that's why I did ambulance for 15 years, because I wasn't, I was good in that situation under pressure like that. And you do what you got to do. You almost never talk to one another. You just know what you got to do and you just do
Mhm.
it. And so I was a little worried in the early stages of my grief with Jeff, because I was like, am I just like, do I have like a shield on me or whatever? And that's why I was so scared about burying my emotions, because I'm like, this does not seem right. Seems like I should be hurting more than I am.
Mhm.
And honestly, in the last 3 months, probably, yeah, or last 2 months, I'd say, I've started going through those that roller coaster again and again. And
Yeah.
so I'm happy. I'm happy it's happening, really, because
Right.
it makes me feel more normal. I was supposed to sing in a Deep Purple tribute band here locally.
Mhm.
I was just starting with that band just
Mhm.
before Jeff passed. So I had done like 2 rehearsals, and they had set a date that they did this past Thursday in a park here along Lake, or um, Niagara River. And so I went to the concert to see them and support them. And after the show, the drummer Rob, a very good friend of mine, he hugged me, and he's very emotional. He's empathetic.
Mhm.
He
Yeah.
feels people's pain, and he
Yeah.
started crying.
Mm.
And I broke down crying harder than I've cried since that initial day, I think. And so it felt, and there's a friend of mine, she was just hugging me and holding me. And I was like, it's okay. It feels good. I was real happy to cry that hard. And
Mm.
so, I, I don't know. I may be unique in it in some ways, but I really want to make sure that I flush it out, because you gotta do that.
Yeah. I feel like that is such an important part of it because like I said before, so many people, and this isn't to say, I say this every time I do a grief episode. I'm not telling you the timeline to do your grief, but if you don't process the emotions, that it will come back eventually, or it will manifest in some way in your body. Because for me, mine was the debilitating anxiety. I had no idea why it was happening. And finally, 7 years into my mom being gone, I realized that I was scared that somebody else was going to be taking care of me or taken away from me. So
Mm,
then my body was just always like waiting for the other shoe to drop, just like, when is it going to happen? So my anxiety, I'm just trying to control everything. Um, and so if you don't deal with those emotions or process emotions, things like that can happen. And then it's going to come and bite you 10 years later, 15 years later. things like that,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know?
no doubt. I see it all the time too in those Kessler sessions, people, and he's real good about questioning them to bring some of that stuff out, especially childhood traumas and things that are
Mhm.
buried in there that are
Mhm.
causing the problems that are happening now for them in processing their grief, for sure.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. So why don't we start talking about the awesome stuff that you're doing now? We said that you left a 15 no. How long? How
We're 14 years full
four
time. Yeah.
yeah, 14 years full-time career to really help people with their grief. So, first of all, what is it that you are doing now, and at what point did you decide, like, this is what I need to be doing?
Again, it was about probably when I started with the Kessler group there, just a
Okay.
couple weeks into their sessions, and I saw him ask somebody, because it's great because he does one-on-ones with people on a couple of the nights, and you learn from their stories just like we're doing here, that
Mhm.
hopefully we can help somebody and encourage them in some way. You
Yep.
always learn from those stories. And
Yep.
so he was asking a woman one time, how are you going to honor your son now? She had lost her son. And I thought about that and I was like, how am I going to honor Jeff? I mean, what is it, through intellect or something? And I thought, well, that's probably not the best way for me to go. So I was like, how am I going to do that? And I pondered that like overnight, and it was really on my mind because I was like, how am I going to do that? Because of course I wanted to. And
Mhm.
so the next day, you know how the internet works, of course. You're looking at one thing and it pops up in your Facebook feed. And so what came up was that Kessler was offering a certified grief educator course that was going to start in a couple weeks.
Mhm.
And so I sent them an email. I'm cutting all this really short, but I sent them an email because I knew I was new in my grief and it
Mhm.
might not be the best thing to do.
Right, right.
So I said, this is what's occurred. This is where I stand in it. And this is my background experience. And I thought that was important for them to know.
Yep.
And so they did send back to me and they said, normally we'd tell people to not engage in this probably now, but
Right.
it seems with your background experience that it may be something that's therapeutic for you.
Mhm.
So that's what it ended up being. It was 12 weeks, and I ended up at the end of June. And so Judy's going through the whole time and asking me, well, what are you going to do? I mean, you got to start making money. You got to do all these things. And I said, I don't know where it's going to go, but I think that this training is something that I really want to do, and it'll lead somewhere. And so still, I'm not sure where that may go with my other experience and everything. I mean, I can certainly offer one-on-ones with people, and I'm
Mhm.
willing to do that. It's very difficult for me to talk about the financial side of it, but they're very good about encouraging you and saying, look, you do have experience for people and you can help them,
Right.
along the way. And really what it comes back to be, and that's what sticks in my mind. And I was
Mhm.
going to say, I'm a grief friend. I am not a counselor. I'm your grief friend to help you walk through this. And I have
Mm.
some insights that can hopefully help you to process what you're processing. And really, you just let them drive it because you don't have to have an agenda. I don't have an outline or
Mm-mm.
anything. You
Mm-mm.
just ask the question, why did you come to me today?
Yep.
What is it that you brought you to me today? And you let it go from there and you just share with them. So naturally I've got all the, what I've learned through the courses and everything, and I can always refer to those things. So
Yep.
that was one part of it. Any job that I've ever had, for some reason, I've been vaulted in the forefront. It's just been my life and it's been a curse in a lot of ways. I used to talk to Jeff about this because my kids certainly knew as I was pastoring and, leading worship up there by myself, doing music, the focus is always on me. And
Yeah.
I even, had struggles in my relationships because of that.
Yeah.
And I didn't process that properly initially and everything. And so I've always
Mm.
tried to defer now and get more humble in my
Mm.
age as I move on. And then in music full time. Naturally, I'm the front man of the groups I'm in. I was a supervisor at almost every job I was ever at, director or supervisor. And so again, this started happening, and I was like, podcast came to my mind, and I have experience, in this type of thing too, audio editing and all those kind of
Mhm.
things, and some technical prowess. So, I thought podcast, and I had no idea what I was going to do it on. And I just put it out at one time too to all the people. I have a huge network locally. I have about 4 or 5 Facebook pages, that are all full of friends. And so I put it out there. I said, if I was to do a podcast, what would I do it on? And I got several suggestions and everything, but I still was not totally settled. And so one day I'm at the gym and I was listening to something, maybe of somebody who had done something with their grief. And it just popped into my head, heroes of grief,
Mm,
and people who, and then I thought the word hero, I thought maybe that's too, I don't know. But then I looked it up and there was a great definition for hero. If you just Google it, it's something about people who do, you know, um, uh, inspirational acts or something like that. And it just fit our situation
right.
like I wanted it to. I
Yep.
didn't want it to be something, Marvel out there like that. That's not what I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about a military person or something like that. That's a different kind of hero.
Hmm.
And but heroes are people who do inspiring things and are that type of thing. So the idea behind the podcast is that just like yours, to have people tell their story and then encourage others with that and get the word about what they're doing, because there's foundations, there's a great things, items that maybe people sell and make and on these type of things. So
Yeah.
there's all type of stuff out there. And very quickly, I've loaded up my schedule with people to be on the podcast. So that's not going to be a problem.
Mm, I love it. You are doing amazing stuff with that. And I'm excited to hear because I know your first episode is going to be coming out soon, relatively
Mm-hmm.
soon.
Yep.
A couple of questions I wanted to ask you. If you were to say, taken that educator course that you took, if there were 3 things that you learned from that course that really stood out to you and made an impact on you, what would you say they were, like, to, help my audience, if they're going through something similar?
One of the big ones was that a lot of people they paint their story of the situation, and he kind of works through us with this and our own grief too. Is they ask you first to give just the facts of what happened. My son died of fentanyl poisoning on the 23rd of February.
Mhm.
Then he asks you to tell the story that you're telling people of what happened, because you usually just don't say that, build a whole story around it, you know, and, then it's also examining what's the story that's going through your head. Like, are you feeling guilty? Was I feeling guilty that I didn't go upstairs that night? Was I dealing with that guilt, or was I processing that like I should?
Mhm.
So, the story you're telling and how that changes through the times too.
Yep.
So that was a huge one, to examine that and have people examine that when they're struggling with something like that. Because he tells a funny story about, he knew this woman, would know her. He worked at a hospice too. And she
Mhm.
would come in for her mom every single day, was there religiously until she passed away. Her mom had stage 4 cancer.
Mhm.
Well, 2 days before she died, she brought tortilla soup that her mother loved, chicken tortilla soup. And
Mhm.
her mother died 2 days later. And she built the story in her mind that the tortilla soup killed her mother. And so it's very important. We can look at that and say that's ridiculous. She had stage 4 cancer.
Right.
So, but some have to process that and go through it. So
Yep.
that's a huge one.
Mm.
Another one is when people to try to help people work on themselves, to ask them questions of what could be a different scenario. And it's similar to that with the stories.
Okay.
Like, what if, this um what if, what if people, have you ever had tortilla soup? And
Yeah.
yes, I didn't die from tortilla soup. I love tortilla soup, and so people don't die of that. So what if there's a scenario that, people didn't die from that tortilla soup and your mom died of, stage 4 cancer? You
Mhm.
never want to get on people you want to help them develop it themselves. So
Yes.
you would ask questions around that. It's a process to help them explore that and find that out themselves, because never do you want to get on a grieving person. Their grief is their grief. You're not there to fix them.
Mm-mm.
You're there to
Mm-mm.
help them walk through it. And so that was another huge one. I think that, it's similar to the other side of it, but it's just helping them work through it themselves. Probably was a very big one. And then well, third, let's see. I think dealing with ourselves and making sure that we take care of ourselves in the midst of it. Judy asked me one time, my fiance, she said, "So don't you think this is going to bring it back for you all the time and everything?" And I said, it may, but I said, we met at hospice. She's a nurse too, and we met at hospice. So I said, you remember when I worked at hospice, I didn't take my job home with me. I mean, when I was done with that, went out and I was playing in a band at the time, and she would come out to watch the band. And, I lived my life and had fun on the outside.
Yeah.
And so you got to make sure to take care of yourself as well. So,
Mm.
um, those first two kind of intermix, but
Yeah.
those would be three strong ones for sure.
That the first one, the first two that you said are so huge because that can be applied to our whole life. One of my biggest because I'm now do self-worth coaching, and one of the biggest topics is limited beliefs and these stories that we carry around all our life that are hindering us and keeping us, there. Like, what are the facts? Like, where are we currently? What are the facts about that? But then, like, what is the story you're telling yourself? Like, for me, mine was, well, I'll always struggle because my mom was a single mom and she struggled too. So it's already written in the stars. That's supposed to be me. Well, it's not
Yeah.
true, and really challenging those scenarios. And I have this, like, what is it? This belief busting script that you kind of go through that, and it's like, well, is this true for everybody? Is this true that everybody dies from tortilla soup? So
Yeah.
i
Yeah.
i love that you said that.
Well, I experienced it too as I went through it because, thinking about when we heard the thud that night, I mean,
Mhm.
that always was like, oh my gosh, if I would have went up, but you know
Right.
what the facts are? The facts are that Jeff was an addict
Yeah.
and he struggled with that. I mean, if he's going to take that on a Wednesday night, then down the line, he still could have done it and still died from it.
Right.
So, like you can't sit there and carry that guilt and
Right.
say that I caused that, or and then I'm examining. I'm like, did I talk to him enough about getting help? Did I do all these different things that go through your head? And that's the story you make up in your mind that you punish yourself with.
Yeah. Yeah.
The truth is, he was an addict, and
Right.
addicts die. That's the truth. And
Yeah.
so, as brutal as it is, that's the truth.
Yeah.
And so, it's important to distinguish
Mm.
what your mind does with you and what the facts are.
Yeah,
So,
it's true. And it will take you, maybe because, a big part is acceptance and accepting that. And so that kind of script that you did maybe will help, okay, that is the fact, is he was an addict, or whatever situation we're talking about. It wasn't, there was nothing I could have done more, different, better. Um,
yeah,
so I like that you
yeah,
said that. Now,
yeah.
my coaching is coming out a little bit, and I'm
Good.
just
I can use it.
curious. I'm just curious to ask this question. Why did you why did you ask other people for ideas about your podcast, and why didn't you listen to yourself at
I
first?
Yeah, I hadn't come up with anything, and so
Okay.
I just was looking. I do that a lot of times. I'll just throw
Okay.
something out to see, people's suggestions on things, and, sometimes it's good to get an outside picture of yourself
Yeah.
too.
Yep.
So, I mean, I tell Judy to do that. She does that for me, but
Yeah.
I need it more, and then we did go to a counselor together too, because we want to make sure we're working on it together, the
Mhm.
way that we should. And it's helped our communication. So that was good.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just more to get a feel,
Okay.
what people may desire out there and ideas. I
Yeah.
really didn't know at that point. So
Yeah. I love that you said, that it did end up coming to you, because that's how it happened for my podcast name and my podcast. I knew what I wanted it to be about, and I know the bright side of life is not original in any type of way, but it really did encompass what I was feeling about my podcast. Was I felt that I was, previous to my healing journey in 2020, I was, a little bit pessimistic, really struggled with self-worth, all these different things. And I aspired to be on the bright side of life. Like, how do I get there? What does that mean? Because I want to be there. And so with my podcast, I'm like, well, people have been in dark, dark times in their life. And how did they get to there? And so that's kind of how that name really meant a lot to me for, and it's taken on many different meanings at this point with the bright side of life, you know?
Yeah. And I searched, I got to get better at my meditation. I drop it a lot and I'm just starting in it. But at that
Yeah.
time I was pretty regular. And so I was just saying, where am I going? What am I doing? And really searching that out too. And I believe those things do come to us and we're guided to do what we're supposed to do. And so, that's, I felt solid in it really. And after it was confirmed, like the hero definition and that kind of thing, I was like, yeah, this is it. This is it. And so, and I've had great support and encouragement in doing this since. And so that's again qualifiers for all of that. So
Yeah.
that's good.
I love that you shared the story about the meditation and then it coming to you, because I'm such a big advocate on getting quiet and sitting still. I meditate often. And when my mom passed away, I knew that I wanted to be the one that what do they call it? What did I read up there whenever eulogy? I knew that I wanted to do
Oh,
her
yeah.
eulogy. And my stepdad was fine with that because he was in no capacity to do that. And I knew how many days I had for her before her funeral, and I still hadn't came up with something, but there was something telling me you don't have to force it, Melissa. What you're going to say, like I needed to figure out how I was going to start it. And literally it sounds so funny, but how I came to that was I had not showered for like 3 days after my mom passed. And I went to go shower and I'm like, "Oh my god, my mom's going to see me naked now." Which brought me to the next thought of how parents always used to say they have eyes in the back of their head. And my mom was really good at like telling me that she did. And so, anyways, I started the whole eulogy with about something about how my mom said she had eyes in the back of her head. Um, my bigger point was it came to me. I didn't put pressure on myself. I knew I had X amount of days, but it just came to me when it was supposed to.
Hmm.
And
It's funny you say in the shower because I've had many of those things happen in the shower and I'm not sure why either.
no, that's so
But,
water is a conductor for for like higher vibrations or frequency.
mm,
That's why people have a lot of aha moments in the shower.
that sounds good. I like that.
I might have butchered that a little bit, but something about water being a conductor for like either energy, vibration, or something, because we are made up of so much water. So it's something to do with that.
That's great because we have a little hot tub, one of those blow up ones, the Intex ones. And
Yeah.
so I was sitting in that water one day and I was just kind of, you're just kind of, I'm letting my arms float and everything. I was like, this would be a great place to meditate. And
Yep.
so I really haven't done that yet, but the bubbles off and everything, just use the water and it's
Yeah.
very comforting. So
There you go.
gotta go there.
Awesome.
I
Okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to mention one more thing. Another thing that I was compelled to do, I
Yeah.
searched around this area and in Western New York, and I searched the web right away. And I did for the Heroes and Grief name, all this. I didn't see it out there. I got
Mhm.
the domain name, heroesandgrief.com, all those kind of things. So I noticed there was no online groups like Facebook groups or anything for grief help in our area. And it floored me that there wasn't any. But I started the Western New York Network for Grief and Grieving. And there's people from all over the world who are in there. It's not just Western New York, but that started just in June too. And we're at over 600 people in there already. And,
Mm.
and there's just such a need out there. Like we've said,
Yep.
people need to have their grief friends. When you
Yep.
go out, I go out and I know so many people around and you start getting this, as time goes on, after they've all dissipated from the initial time of your
Mhm.
grief, they go on with their lives and your life is stuck in this. We are
Yep.
not a grief literate society at
No.
all.
Nope.
And so, 3 days off of work and you're back, you're supposed to be normal. That's just not the way it goes.
Uh-uh.
So, I'm going to a party or something. They hug me and now I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm doing, and I could tell where they're kind of going with stuff. And I'd say, this isn't the place,
Right.
let's have fun here, everything. And we can talk about that later or something. And so some people don't have those outlets and they don't have grief friends, the ones who you do talk to these things about, you can just tell them they're empathetic, like my friend Rob, who
Yeah.
hugged me, and those people. So you don't have them. So this is a safe place for them to go, just a Facebook group. It's a private group. And so you can share your things about grief when they come on. We have people who are years down the line, like yourself,
Hmm.
or new people in grief, and they can share on there and just have a safe place to do that. And so
Yeah.
it's very important. To spin off of that, I met with one of my friends went through his son dying of pediatric cancer. And
Mm.
so there's a group here locally. It's a non-for-profit group that was started by one of the Buffalo Bills players a long time ago, Brian Moorman. It's called the Punt Foundation. He was a punter for the Bills.
Hmm.
And it's a pediatric cancer collaborative. So it's helping people in those situations as they go through pediatric cancer and bereavement care. They notice that there's a drought of bereavement care in this area too, and they're looking for funding to have a center, like a building where people could come for free and we could run courses and everything else. I met with that director. I'm totally behind that initiative. She's already approached some of the biggest money people in our area, philanthropists, to try and secure that. And I've started putting that out there. So I'm trying to get on a mission to get that rolling too somehow. And we could really, we're looking for funding, get a building, and have backing for something like that. And I think we'll find that. I think
Yeah.
that's something that, and it would just be a beautiful place that people could go and walk in at any time and get
Yeah.
help. And I think it's just a great idea.
It is a great idea. And you have done so much. Well, I mean, you have done so much in your life, but now just these 6 months, of all this stuff and maybe finding your new meaning or whatever. That's something I wanted to say is I feel like sometimes life is that, it's like we think that there's like this, there's only one thing out there that I could ever possibly be. And that's not true. You have done so much. And maybe for this season, this is what you do. You help people with grief and stuff like that. And I just think it's awesome. And it's bringing you in alignment to who Tom is today. Maybe
Yeah.
this wasn't the same that Tom was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And I think it's so awesome.
I think, I mean, so many people say, "Oh, music's your passion. It's your passion." And I would say at one time, maybe I'm not as passionate as people think I am about music. Not like some are, like I
Yeah,
don't buy tons of equipment. I don't do, I hardly ever really listen to music just for enjoyment unless I'm
mm,
out watching a band or something. I
right.
listen to podcasts and talk shows.
Yep.
That's what I do. Or I was
Yep.
learning music. That's why I was
Mhm.
listening to music. So, but I think I've grown a little bit, in a short period of time to say, I think you could be passionate about things in a season, like
Yes.
have that passion going on at that
Yep.
season in time.
Yep.
So, perhaps you're right with that, and that might be the case.
Yeah. And that was like with me, as soon as I started my healing journey and my podcast at the same time, um, you know, I've just fallen in love with personal growth and healing and all that stuff. I don't know that will now ever go away because I really do. But there's been certain things I've been obsessed with, like first it was mental health, then it was self-care, and not that they're not all encompassed, but now my big thing is like people that struggle with self-worth, and I want to help them with that and all that stuff. So um I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's a huge one, the
Yeah.
self-worth thing.
Yeah. Yes,
When I was
exactly.
pastoring, I could almost find almost every single time I found somebody struggling with something, it was because of their own self-worth.
Yep.
Almost
Exactly.
every time.
And that's
So,
why it's literally the foundation to every choice that we make in our life. If we don't feel worth it, then we're not going to try to go after that job. We're not going to take care of our health. We're not going to take care of our self-care. It's literally the foundation of our lives of it affects all of our choices and decisions that we make in our life. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Like with a lot of my things in the past too, I haven't felt worthy of them, but I know that I have to just keep going forward. And I say, why not?
Yeah.
That was always my case. Like, why
Yep.
not?
Yep.
And why couldn't
Exactly.
I be the director of this
Uh-huh.
center that opens up? I mean, something seems to have always happened big for me in some way. And
Yeah.
I was even asked this last night. Someone was talking to me. He's going, "Well, what are you going to do for money?" I mean, yeah. And I'm like, "Well, I'm going to find that out, and I will.
Yeah.
I can help people one on one, like I said, or do group sessions. I'm sure I'll probably be a speaker.
Yep.
I'm going to get program together to do speaking engagements and things. And I'm a CDL driver too, transport driver. So I work for
Of
a
course you
local
are.
company. I work for a local company here over the falls tours, and I do transports for them. So I am getting some money going right
Yeah.
now. And it just seems to be a perfect job right now, actually, for that. So I was a tour guide at one time with them. So yeah. Well,
You really have done it all.
and this is what I used to say to Jeff too. I'm like, because I mean, Judy said to me one time too, she goes, Jeff would want you to do the music, you know? And I said, I don't really know. We didn't talk about it that way. Like I didn't, Jeff wasn't proud of me as his dad because I was the guy up there doing music.
Mhm.
You know, he always saw that side, but I always told him how I kind of struggled with it. You know, I mean, I didn't like people telling me, oh, you're this and that and giving me accolades and all these things.
Right.
I just wanted to disappear in a way, and even
Mm.
the music, like in the clubs and things like that, was probably fading anyways. I kept saying every single summer, I'm going to back off. I'm going to back off. Life's too short. I want to do other things. And so I didn't know I was going to be realigned this way. But,
Right.
and so in a sense, it's been relieving to me,
Yeah.
in that way too. So
Mm.
a lot of people don't understand those things that are going on and everything. And I get that too. They only know me from the music side. So
Yeah.
they're like, wow, how can you just change? And like, well, half my life was something different than all of this, over half my life. So it's not that odd, really.
Right. Exactly. Sorry, my dog wanted to say hi.
That's all
He
right. Hello,
he
I'm a big dog person.
he I can edit this part out. And that's something that is so important, is everybody can't understand it, like, "Oh my god, you're leaving music or you're doing this," but of course it all comes down to like what's important to you and what's like speaking to you. I had another point that I wanted to make with that I don't remember what it was. Oh, well, usually you will find, like I learned this in my coaching sessions, is people usually big changes in their life usually like prompt something like this, like the loss of your son prompted you to do a career change or whatever. It's if you hear people start telling their story, they'll say, well, when this happened, well, when this, it's usually because of his significant relationship, either marriage, divorce, loss, or something, or an event like mine was COVID. And that's when I decided to make a shift and all that stuff. Um, and it happens and it's time to realign. So I think
Yeah.
it's
And I
awesome.
get great encouragement from the people who I can just tell are solid,
Yeah.
and they can see, the depth of something different. And
Yep.
so it's very encouraging. And, you know, those are people that I respect, and I think that to get that encouragement from them and get that validation really in what I'm
Yeah.
doing instead. And it's like, that sounds like you should be doing something like that, and
Yeah.
so that helps. But
I-
I'm just like anybody else too. When Judy asked me, "So where is this going?" I'm like, "I don't know, but I want to find out pretty quick." So,
Yeah. Yep.
we'll see.
I love it. I love it. Well, I have one question before you leave, but is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you would like to share? Um, or anything?
Yeah, I don't think so. I'd
Okay.
like people to come along and follow us along on the rest of the way too. And like
Yeah.
I said, I'd love to have you on my show,
Yes.
so we can turn that around too and get your
Okay.
story and all of that. So, um, that's about it. Like I
Okay.
said, it's early stages of all this, but I'm
Yeah.
getting kicked in the pants by people. I put a little teaser out there about the podcast, and they're like, I've 60 people signed up to my YouTube page already, and I don't even have anything on there. So, that's all great, and I got to get something going for them. So,
Yeah.
thank you for the start. That's
Yeah.
great, and
Absolutely. Yep.
I'll certainly get this out to everybody as well.
Yeah. And for any of my listeners, you guys, his information will be in the show notes so you guys can connect with him and we'll link his YouTube so you can follow along there. And then when his episodes go live, all that great stuff. So your information will be on there.
Thank you. I like I mentioned, I want to start with people one on one and things too. So, sometimes people just connect with somebody and then they
Yep.
feel comfortable with them.
Yep.
So if I'm that person for you, reach out to me. I'll work out something pay wise with you. I'm not going to get crazy with it. I just want to be supported, So, I mean, I don't want it to be that way. I wish I could just do it for free, but obviously you got to work somehow.
Yeah.
So that's really where that comes from. If you feel comfortable with that and you want to reach out to me, we can do Zoom sessions like this or phone or whatever you want. And if it's working for you, then that's what I want to happen. So that's where that comes
Perfect.
from.
Perfect. I love it. So we'll put your email, right? How they can
Yeah, you can do
contact
that.
you. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, I ask all of my guests this at the end of every episode. In your own words, what does the bright side of life mean to you?
The bright side of life for me would be um, that you are, and I think it just comes from what we were just talking about. When you're walking your path, and all the elements involved in this, and that includes Judy and the family I have through her, and my whole family, and everything else that they are walking along with you, and
Mm,
so that means a lot of different things. But as I
yeah.
move on through this and everything else, and having them surrounding me and having that love from them, that is really what it's all about. And like I said, those two tenets of love, and that word has gotten so huge for me now, to
Yep.
love one another. And I
Yep.
just feel totally different toward everyone I encounter, even at the
Mm,
gas pump. I mean,
yeah.
different people, and
Yep.
saying hello to them. And
Mm,
it does brighten your life. It really does. When
yeah.
you look at somebody and you say hello and you look them in the eye, which our society doesn't do much anymore,
Mm-mm.
and they smile and say, "Oh, hi," and just, there's nothing better. And
Yeah.
so following that and treating them the way they needed to be treated.
Yeah, I really like that. And really quickly with that, just looking at somebody at the gas pump, I often drive down a street in St. Louis that there's, often homeless people, so on and so forth. And every time I will send them love from afar and just say, I hope they have a good day. I hope they stay safe. Or I saw one guy that was definitely not having a good day, kicking his tires because his car wouldn't start. And I just said, a little prayer and tried to like send him good vibes or whatever, of like, hopefully he can get this off the road or get money or whatever he's upset about. Just they don't necessarily have to know. If I have no way of saying that to a person, you can still send them your love just by thinking about it.
And it's changed me to be so much more peaceful inside too, because we may have our beliefs of certain things and everything, and a lot of times they may frustrate us. When you have the sense that we're all really part of one thing, and those positive vibes really do mean something, whether
Yep.
it's a prayer, whether it's just a positive vibe toward a situation or person, they
Yeah.
really matter. They're proving this more and more now,
Yes.
even with scientifically.
Yep.
It matters. So, stay on the positive side. And I don't get frustrated by people in traffic as
Nope.
much. I do, seeing things on TV. I stay away from the negative things or whatever.
Hmm.
And I just don't go there with that. You can really only influence the sphere you have around you. And a lot of those things really never mattered,
Yeah.
when you process them. So, stay true to that sphere, and do good.
Yeah. I love it. Well, Tom, thank you so, so much for coming on here to share your story. And I know that this episode will definitely help people.
Been a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanna